Hey everybody, Jimmy Smith, this time with my opinions about Jon Jones versus Tom Aspinall. Will we see it happen? If we don't, is it the biggest duck in MMA history? Now, one thing about ducks, right, someone not wanting to fight someone else and putting their foot down and not doing it, we miss the fight, it's extremely rare in MMA. Why? The promotions ultimately decide who fights whom. And unless you retire and walk away from the sport, either fight this guy or you're not fighting. We'll strip you and there's nothing you can do about it. You won't fight for us again. Or we'll lock you down. You can't fight for anybody else and we'll keep you on the shelf for as long as it takes. The promotions hold all the cards. Ducking in boxing happens all the time. It's endemic in boxing. Why? Superstar boxers can decide who they fight essentially. And the only thing that a sanctioning body can do is take away the particular title for not fighting a particular mandatory. Right? So the IBF recently stripped Canelo Alvarez for not fighting their mandatory at 168 pounds. So what? He's fighting Berlanga at Mexican Independence Day opposite the UFC. And so what? IBF title's not going to be on the line. So it's not undisputed, right? It isn't every title that's going to be on the line. Most fans don't care. They just don't know the difference. Most fans couldn't tell you what titles were on the line when Mayweather fought Pacquiao. If you put a gun to their head, they don't know, they don't care. They want to see superstar fighters fight, and it doesn't really matter. So ducking happens all the time in boxing because the belts themselves, while meaningful to some degree for the upper echelon of fighters, they're nice but not necessary. In MMA, that promotional muscle being behind you means almost everything. And so it's essentially up to the promotions who fights and when. So we don't see a lot of ducking. When you see, which you can on YouTube or anywhere else, the list of top fights we never saw in the UFC or various other promotions, it's usually just a matter of circumstances. A certain fighter didn't fight a certain fighter because it just never worked out. It wasn't because that one fighter or one of the two fighters didn't want to fight the other one. Of course, when you look at Tony Ferguson, Khabib, they tried to make that a million times. It just never worked out. It wasn't that Khabib or Tony was ducking the other. So this would, by my estimation, because we don't see it that often, be the biggest duck in MMA history if we don't see Jon Jones versus Tom Aspinall. Because defeating Stipe in a title fight, it's supposed to be in November, who at that time will be off 3.5 years, Stipe, who's on the back nine of his career anyway, who doesn't have what he used to have, period, end of sentence, period. He's not the fighter he once was. He's a legend. He's the greatest UFC heavyweight of all time. I put him second all time behind Fedor as far as heavyweight fighters. Beating Stipe, to me, does nothing for Jon Jones. Right. We all expect him to win. He will be a massive favorite in this fight. So legacy-wise, it doesn't do anything for him. It made sense kind of at the time they originally made it, which remember was November of last year. It was originally supposed to happen. Jon Jones got injured. That delayed everything. Pectoral tear. That takes a while to heal up. And in the meantime, Aspinall's stock has gone through the roof. So it made a little bit of sense in terms of, all right, that's a kind of a stopgap fight. That gives Jon Jones, I beat the greatest heavyweight in UFC history, and Aspinall will work out sometime in 2024. Well, none of that happened because of the injury, and as the time has dragged on, it's become less and less relevant as a fight. So the Stipe fight means nothing to Jon Jones, legacy-wise. Or even right now, his status as a champion, it means almost nothing. And Tom Aspinall has gotten better and better and better. He is the interim champion. He just defended his title against Curtis Blaydes. If you didn't see it, he blew him out of the water in a minute. It's this idea that the two best heavyweights in the world are Jon Jones and Tom Aspinall. I happen to agree with DC that Aspinall is the #1 heavyweight in the world. I really do believe he is #1. So anything outside of that is a waste of time. In boxing, people say all the time, you want to look good. You don't want to look so good that you end up torpedoing the big fight. You want to be great. You don't want to be so dangerous that the fighter that you want a big fight with, Canelo Alvarez, Tank Davis, some big megastar, doesn't want to fight you because you're too good. So it's one of those things where Tom Aspinall could have perhaps done that, where he looked so good against Curtis Blaydes and looked so good in previous fights that Jon Jones is going, I don't want to fight this guy. And Jon Jones is in that rare air of superstar fighter who can decide to some degree who he fights, who is also at the end of his run and can retire. I have said many, many times, your only bargaining chip with the UFC is, I'll retire. You can't make them fight. You can make them fight for you. You can make them not leave. If you fight in MMA, you're going to fight for us. But if somebody retires, you can't stop them. People remember GSP defeating Johnny Hendricks and retiring, and Dana White was pissed, and he can't do that. Yeah, he can. There's nothing you can do about someone not wanting to fight anymore. He wanted Khabib back. Couldn't make him fight. Right? You have no legal recourse. Can't make somebody fight once they retire. So the issue here is Jon Jones is in a position where I want to fight Stipe. If you don't give me Stipe, I'm going to retire. I don't want to fight Tom Aspinall. We're going to make you. I'll retire. He can walk away. He's made enough money. His legacy is secure enough, and we'll get to legacy talk in a minute, where he doesn't have to. And it's very rare that a fighter, especially a sitting champion, has that kind of juice. All right? The UFC can generally tell you what to do. There's not a whole lot you can do about it if you want to continue fighting. Most champs in their prime don't want to retire. They don't want to walk away from the sport. Very few do. GSP, Khabib are the only ones to really do it. And Amanda Nunes, right, walked away in their prime. But there's always that button of, okay, I'll retire. I have enough money. I don't need to do this anymore. Dana White's not used to being in this position where he has a sitting champion who's doing great things, who's really, really popular, who's also at retirement age and has made enough money to do that. So he can kind of push that button of, all right, I'll just leave. And I think that's probably what happened with the Stipe fight, where that was a fight Jon Jones wanted. Nothing we can really do about it, because if we try to make him fight someone else, he won't do it, and he could walk away. So he's in a unique position to duck. Now, legacy. When you look at the legacy of Jon Jones, he's in a really kind of strange spot as far as it goes. Meaning, he's number one on my Mount Rushmore of MMA. He's the greatest mixed martial artist of all time. The only thing you can hold against him is his out-of-octagon problems, drug tests, his personal failings. You know, if you hold that against him and say, he's a doper, he's not number one, sure, I understand and respect that. What I've seen in the octagon, he's number one, period. All right, it goes to me, Jon Jones, GSP, Anderson Silva, Amanda Nunes. That's my top four. But the idea that Jon Jones' legacy is kind of secure. He's the number one pound for pound fighter of all time. Even if he doesn't fight Tom Aspinall, he's still number one. He could not fight Steve. He could right now retire, and he's number one all time. But he's not the number one heavyweight of all time. I don't think a win over Tom Aspinall does that for him, but there's a debate you can have, which is, and I had this debate with Brendan Schaub backstage at a Bellator show at Madison Square Garden. We were talking about the top heavyweight of all time because Fedor had signed with Bellator. He fought Matt Mitrione that night about the greatest heavyweight of all time. And he said it was Kane, and I said it was Fedor. And my point was, Kane had a short run. Kane, in that sliver of time when he wasn't injured and he was firing on all cylinders and he was amazing, you could argue that guy beats anyone in MMA history. But when you talk about legacy, you got to talk about the length of the run and go, look, that guy, Fedor, beat everyone in Pride, which included, by the end of his career, I think 6 UFC champions. 6. He defeated 6 UFC heavyweight champions. And so that run, that length of run is just unbelievable. And Kane in his prime, you could argue beats anybody, but part of legacy is how long did you do it? And Kane, because of his injuries, was always stopping and starting. Jon Jones, if he beats Tom Aspinall, his heavyweight run will have consisted of Cyril Gane, Stipe Miocic, Tom Aspinall. That run isn't long enough for him to be the top heavyweight of all time or the top UFC heavyweight of all time. But you could once again make that argument that, God, in that little run, he beats any heavyweight of all time. And if he beats Tom Aspinall, especially if he does it in dramatic fashion, you can make that argument. That, I think, means something to Jon Jones. This is where ego comes in. And I don't know Jon Jones personally. I don't know what's in his head. I don't know what's in his heart. But if he walks away now, he's the greatest pound-for-pound fighter of all time. And by now, I mean before he fights Tom Aspinall. Let's say he beats Stipe and walks away. But that will secure that part of his ego. But the other side is he ducked Tom Aspinall. That will always be part of his legacy. I think a legacy does mean something to Jon Jones. So which way does his ego lead him? I don't want to go out on a loss. I don't want to go out on a duck. And he has to balance those out. can I take on Tom Aspinall and beat him and be the greatest pound-for-pound mixed martial artist of all time, for sure, and be on some people's list for heavyweight? Or do I walk away and have that basically undefeated streak? We all know about Matt Hamill. That was BS. And go basically undefeated and take that pound-for-pound ranking. All time. That's big. I don't know which way Jon Jones goes, but that's the ego battle. Is if I fight Tom Aspinall and I beat him, all-time greatness, solid. And when you talk about heavyweight, I'll be on that list of great heavyweights. Not number one, but I'll be on that list of all-time great heavyweights. Man, 3 in a row, and he looked dominant, assuming he does, in all 3 fights. That means something. But he doesn't want to go out on a loss either. Personally, I have a lot of respect for the fighter that, it's a WWE thing, gets somebody else over or passes the torch to the next generation, right? They don't go out there to lose like you do in pro wrestling where you intentionally lose. I'm talking that idea of this next fighter is the come-up guy, fighting him before you get out. I have tremendous respect for fighters who do that, win or lose. So I would have tremendous respect for Jon Jones taking on this risk of Tom Aspinall, who looks absolutely incredible in the head. Win or lose, even if he loses to Tom Aspinall, I will go, man, he took on the best when he didn't have to. And that's a huge part of this conversation. Jon Jones doesn't have to fight anyone. To me, it would elevate him in a big way if he fought somebody he didn't have to fight, because legacy meant something and keeping the division moving is important. If he beats Tom Aspinall and walks off into the sunset, he can say, hey, I walked off because nobody was going to beat me, and mean it. If he walks off after Stipe and leaves Tom Aspinall kind of on the table, it's that idea of you didn't clear it out before you left. There were still fighters left to go, which is a little bit of the criticism of Khabib when he walked away. There were still great 155-pounders out there. He had a very short title run by comparison, 3 title defenses. And so the idea that there were still other guys out there. With these 3, if Jon Jones gets that and beats Tom Aspinall, I don't see any other legitimate threat out there. There are other heavyweights, but I don't think anybody would beat him until he gets too old. So what will he do? Because if he ducks Tom Aspinall, it is the greatest duck ever. Don't get a lot of them in MMA. This would be a big one, I think the biggest. Let me know what you think in the comments section. Appreciate y'all. See you soon.